listening to The Switch. The Switch is a podcast about ideas and experiences that change our minds. I'm Chase Harris, joined as always by my co-host, Alex Berner. In this episode, we speak with Anthony Magnabosco and Ben Diesel. Anthony and Ben are YouTubers with channels focused on street epistemology, which is the focus of our discussion. Street epistemology is a technique for conversation, and we explain it more, but on the surface, it's just a way of applying the study of epistemology to, an everyday layperson scenario. You don't have to be some sort of academic to understand it. It's pretty straightforward and simple, and it really allows people who disagree to have a productive conversation.
And Chase, could you give a quick definition of epistemology before we start?
Sure. Epistemology is the study of how we acquire knowledge, and it's used a couple of different ways, but at its core, you can think of knowledge as a pyramid, and this is an example that comes straight from one of Anthony's presentations. At the top of the pyramid, we have the things we believe, whether they're true or false, whatever they are, they're the things we think are true. Supporting the things we think are true are our reasons for thinking those things are true. Sometimes that's specific pieces of evidence, sometimes that's personal, accounts of what happened, whatever the reasons that we think things are true. And then beneath our reasons is our epistemology. And this is how we decide what reasons are good and what reasons are bad. For example, if I want to know, if my end goal is to have at the top of that pyramid the measurement of my door frame in inches, starting at the bottom, I could have a bunch of different techniques for trying to acquire that knowledge. I could throw a bunch of sticks on the ground and try to divine an answer from the way that they land. I could ask a dog, or I could use a tape measure. And my evaluation of whether those techniques are good or bad is reflective of my epistemology, of my way of understanding how it's reasonable to come to knowledge or not.
Cool. If you like what we do here on The Switch, the best way to support us is through Patreon. For as little as $1, you can become part of the community. Ask us questions, suggest topics, and directly communicate with us. You can also unlock bonus content like extra questions we ask our guests. If you want more of The Switch, both on topic and off, you can become a patron at www.patreon.com/switch_podcast.
You can also check us out on social media. On Instagram and Twitter, we are at switch_podcast. And on Facebook, we are The Switch Podcast. So, without further delay, we start with a quote from the book Meditations on Violence by Rory Miller. Assumptions are those things you believe to be true without really considering them. They provide the background for much of how you see the parts of the world that you have never experienced. For instance, you can assume that people elsewhere in the world are very similar to the people you know, or you can assume they are very different. Either point of view will color all of your interactions with and perceptions of those people. Like many things, your assumptions affect you far more than they affect the world. It is very difficult to analyze your own assumptions. In your own mind, they are only the things that you believe, the true things. As I wrote above, they are the things you never really considered, because you've never really doubted them. Epistemology is the study of how people and societies decide what is true. What is your personal epistemology? What sources do you consider unimpeachable? If it's on the 11 o'clock news, does that make it true? If all your friends are saying something, does that make it true? If it's in Science Digest or Scientific American, do you believe it? If your pastor said it, is it gospel? Sorry, pun. Do you trust your personal experience? Examine your own epistemology. Look at your beliefs and the source of those beliefs. Some of your beliefs came from early training or bad sources. Some of your sources were chosen because you knew they supported your pre-existing point of view. Look very deeply at those sources that you accept without question. As you do this, it will allow you to see many things that you have thought of as true as merely opinions, and give you great freedom in exploring and understanding both your world and other people's. And with that, I would like to introduce our guests for today, Anthony Magnabosco and Ben Diesel. Welcome to The Switch.
Hey, nice to be
Thank
here.
you so
What a
much.
great quote.
Yeah, if you can sum that up to one sentence, I think we can use it to change the world.
I agree, and I definitely recommend this book. I actually got the book recommendation from Sam Harris's recommended reading list. So we are big Sam Harris fans around here.
Nice.
Now that's one cat that I wish would stumble across SE, or if he has, please start mentioning it, because time and time again things come up on his podcast and I'm thinking, if he only understood street epistemology, it might really resolve a lot of these conflicts that he seems to be running into.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think it can solve a lot of things. But before we get into street epistemology and what exactly it is, I would like to give you guys some time to give your story, specifically your background, especially any religious upbringing or experience, sort of the roles of reason and faith in your personality, and your attitude toward religion leading up to your discovery of this thing called street epistemology. So, Anthony, why don't you go first? And
Oh, thank you. Well, let's see. It all kind of starts back when I was a kid. I was a skeptical kid, and I was raised in a religious household, and I always questioned, even at a very young age. And it became evident to me that there's some things that maybe just don't seem right. They don't seem true, but you just kind of have to go along with it. And I was sort of going along with that until my mid-20s even, where that's when I started questioning even more and learning the definitions of these words, and then coming to be comfortable with saying, I don't know if I believe this stuff. And shortly around that time, I suppose, I started reading literature, becoming more and more comfortable with saying, I'm skeptical. I'm not sure I believe this stuff. And I discovered a book by Peter Boghossian where he was talking about this thing called street epistemology. I know we'll get into that, but that's largely why people know who I am, is because of the work that I've done with that approach. And it's really been instrumental in helping me have more effective and meaningful conversations with people about all sorts of claims. And I've never been more happy or sure of my of the things that I'm unsure of, I suppose, is a way of putting it. And I'm fine with that. I'm very comfortable with saying I don't know, and I'm very comfortable with saying, let's look that up, or I'm beginning to doubt, I'm beginning to question. Those are all things that probably would have scared me in the past, but these days they really excite me. And here I am today, sitting with you folks, and I'm really eager to get into what's bringing us all here. But that's kind of my journey, my story in a nutshell.
awesome. And what about you, Ben?
So I'm from South Africa, the Rainbow Nation. And the weird thing about South Africa, I'm Afrikaans, so it's a language was only spoken in South Africa, and we're about 5% of the population. But even though we're only 5% of the population, I grew up in a neighborhood where everybody looked like me, spoke the same language as I did. I went to a large school where everybody was exactly the same as well. And even the university I went to, I was able to take all my courses in Afrikaans. So growing up it was kind of very insular. You live in a country where you've got 11 different national languages, but you only get confronted by people who think and act and talk exactly the same way you do. So I grew up in a very conservative church. It's called the NG Nederduits Gereformeerd. I have no idea what it is in English. And it's not similar to the evangelical churches in the US. It's very, don't stand up and dance, don't sing in church. You're not really supposed to enjoy this, but you need to follow the norms. You need to stick to what we say. And I was bought into that when I was younger quite strongly. When I got to university, I started not being confronted by it, but I started to see the real South Africa. We've got some pretty serious social issues stemming from our history of segregation. And I started to realize that Black people in my country were living a completely different reality to the reality that I was living. So what that did for me is I had to start changing the way in which I view the world, because everybody around me kind of had this view that, it isn't as bad as everybody says. When the political climate changed and a Black party came into power, many white South Africans kind of also developed this kind of victim mentality. And that didn't sit well with me. I started to really look deeper and try to look past that to see, okay, but we're all sharing this space. How can we move past it? And that has led to a lot of conflicts with people in my social circles, people I work with. And it never really turned out very well. My approach was my assumption was we were looking at the same facts, but they just didn't have the right perspective. And I was convinced that if I could show them that my perspective is the right one, hopefully they would change their minds. Works in theory, not so well in practice. So when I stumbled onto the Street Epistemology videos, it was just like it clicked. And I was so eager to start trying this. And luckily, in the work environment I have, we're quite a small group. We have very, very interesting discussions. We've got a young Earth creationist there. We've got a diehard Trump supporter. So there really never was a lack of topics that we can jump into. And I saw that by using this technique, starting to ask these questions, I had much more productive conversations. So yeah, that's what convinced me to get into it and to dive deeper into it.
Yeah, and briefly, I had probably a similar experience to a lot of people out there. I grew up Catholic, and I had started to question my faith early in life. I'm not really sure how early, but I'd started having these conversations with people I disagreed with religiously, and I had that same experience of like trying to convince someone that my perspective is right and their perspective is wrong. Didn't really work all that well. It was like, beating up against a brick wall. And when I stumbled upon this, specifically Anthony's videos of this technique of street epistemology, and I immediately bought the book, and I was like, all right, I got to do this. And it's totally changed the way that I interact with people I disagree with about pretty much any topic now.
It ties back to that quote that you gave. I think that assumption that everybody thinks the same way as you do, as soon as you can get past that, it just changes everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like how this technique of street epistemology changes the practitioner as well as generally the person who's making the claim. If you go about it and you have that epistemic humility, that understanding that, oh my gosh, even the things that I think are true really should be examined. That this isn't just about tearing down people's beliefs. It's really so much more about being humble about the things that we think that we know, and we probably don't really. The confidence that we give these beliefs are probably not warranted.
Mm-hmm. So we've all sort of talked about the moment up to discovering this technique, and my discovery was of Anthony's videos. Ben, I'm not sure whose videos you may have seen or what your experience was with this technique, but Anthony, could you just give maybe a brief introduction to what it was that, when people like me discover or stumble upon your channel, what is it that we're seeing right off the bat? Like what are you doing, or what were you doing with these videos that has now generated all of this community almost?
Well, it kind of depends on which video you stumble across, because I've been throwing up content for the last going on 6 years in December. So if you go to some of my very early content, you're going to say, you'll probably walk away with the impression that, wow, that guy's pretty aggressive, and why is he arguing with people? Because that's what I kept, even though I was aware that that's probably what I shouldn't have been doing, it's so hard to stop doing it. So if you look at my early conversations, I'm arguing with street preachers. But if you were to look at anything from, say, 2014 on, and I advise people to look at some of the more recent stuff first if you just want to get a better understanding of what's happening. What I think you'll find is I'm respectful, polite. I try to listen very closely. These days, I encourage people to pick the claim that they want to investigate with me. I'm asking a ton of questions. I think if you count the number of times I tell them something as opposed to ask them questions, it might be 20-1, where I'm asking lots and lots of questions, but not to the point where they're being overwhelmed. What I think you'll find, though, what I think resonates with people when they watch these videos, and what I think stands out to them the most, is observing a person who's made a claim that a God exists, or karma is real, or this lucky rabbit's foot protects me, or some political stance. And the conversation is not getting heated. We're not arguing, and we're certainly not throwing lots of facts at each other, but we're getting down to the epistemology, or the process they used to arrive at their level of certainty. And on top of that is seeing light bulb moments or ceiling spider moments where they're gazing up at the sky or the ceiling and they're taking literally 30 seconds to think about, how can I answer that easy question that he just asked me? It's so simple. Why can't I verbalize it? Or how am I having so much difficulty? Because I know that this thing is true. That, I think, is what people oftentimes notice first when they observe these videos.
Cool. Okay. So I think that's a great spot to get into. What is street epistemology?
Let's define this thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's definitions.
Ben, you want to take a crack at it?
Yeah, sure. Street epistemology is basically taking epistemology, which is the study of knowledge, and applying a lot of that theory in a more relaxed, non-academic context. So epistemology can mean a lot of things, but mostly it relates to how we form beliefs. And beliefs is kind of a loaded word, especially in South Africa, where faith and belief is used kind of interchangeably. So it's really anything that we accept as true. How can we say that the process that we followed to accept a claim as being true is a reliable process? How can we say that this thing that we accept as being true is actually justified? It's justified for us to say that it's true. And what we do in street epistemology is, well, we're not the only guys. We're not necessarily doing the way that it has to be done. The idea there is to take this study, and it's something which people typically never see in their lives. It's a topic which most people are never exposed to, and to use it in your everyday life when somebody makes a claim, rather than attacking the claim itself, just trying to understand the process that they use to arrive at that position. Is it reliable? And in that process of asking questions, trying to understand, help that person to reflect and look deeper into what got them to that specific position.
And street epistemology sounds so academic, but it's not. When you see this approach in practice, there's nothing academic about it. And what's fascinating is that anybody who looks into this just a little bit can probably pick it up. You don't need to have a formal study in philosophy or epistemology or psychology. This is a very readily accessible method, and that's what's so exciting about it, is that people are watching a few videos, maybe joining a Facebook group, having a few conversations with other people to learn more about this method, and then they can pretty much start right away engaging in these kinds of talks and having those reflective moments that I mentioned earlier.
So you guys both use the word method to talk about knowledge. Could you give an example of what would be a method for coming to know something?
There's so many. Well, lots of different methods. I could observe a commercial and come to a conclusion that something might be true, or have a conversation with a friend of mine that that we've known each other for 30 years and give it more weight because it's coming from somebody that I really know and trust. I might observe a news article or happen across a book that says something that's true. There are other ways too. We have lots of personal experiences. I might take something on faith, perhaps, that it's true. So there's lots of different methods that people use to come to their conclusions. When we have these conversations and start asking questions, what's important to us during this dialectical that we engage with is, did you use a reliable process? Because if the process that got you from point A to B is shaky, and if somebody else took it, it might end up from A to Z, and another person might end up from A to Q, you might want to take another look at the process that all these people are using to get to those destinations.
And it might seem like a weird question, but why do we want to make sure that what we believe is true?
A lot of people will say, why are you bothering these people? Why are you starting these conversations? Now, to be clear, you don't have to start conversations with people. You can wait for these claims to happen organically. But yeah, that's a common thing. Why do you even care? Oh my gosh, why wouldn't you care? I'm baffled by the question, but I do understand that some people are perplexed by it. Why don't you just leave people alone? They're not bothering you. What's with you? There's nothing more important than being around others that want to believe true things, in my opinion. I couldn't stomach the idea of not exploring our beliefs to determine how we concluded that they're true. I can't think of anything much more important than that. So it baffles me when people do say that. I can understand why people might think that, especially if they've been arguing with people and they've had those debates and they're losing friends and family because they've had these blowout conversations and arguments. I might be a little gun shy and a little afraid to engage in those talks too.
Yeah.
However, if you try this different approach of SE, it's so non-confrontational and I think effective that hopefully people take another look at that stance and say, well, maybe it is important that what I'm believing in is true, or maybe it is important that other people are believing things that are true.
And I think the reason that I think it's important is because like what we believe does have consequences. You know, if we believe that everybody else is evil and doesn't deserve respect, that has an implication on how we interact with the world. So
yes, absolutely. That's the core of it, is that your beliefs motivate you to behave differently. And if you're believing something that's not true, you might actually be harming yourself or somebody else. Maybe not to the point where they're being physically harmed, but you might decide to vote a different way. And that could have long-term effects on people. So yeah, for sure, our beliefs do motivate us to behave differently.
One thing that someone might not worry about a specific belief being true or not, but what they don't realize is if they've got this epistemology, this method of coming to beliefs, and that method is flawed in some way, later on in their life, there might actually be something where they really do care about whether this is true. You know, they want to marry somebody. They need to make a serious decision in life. And if they're still relying on this shaky method, it can really get them into trouble. But one of the questions which frequently comes up in street epistemology conversations is, do you value truth? And I think I've only seen one person who's answered no to that question.
Yeah, I think most people would at least say that they value truth. But I wanted to reinforce the point that you made there about how, you know, it's not necessarily always about the belief in question. It really is an examination of what methods you think are reliable, and that can actually be a measure of what other things you might or might not be liable to believe, or how trustworthy a source you are. I think one of the biggest things that for me came out of this discovery of street epistemology and then subsequent study of epistemology in general is I started to realize that it's almost like when you see someone lie, it's a measure of how likely they are to lie in the future. When you see someone come to a belief through unreliable means, you question the validity or the reliability of the rest of what they might tell you. And that's a pretty big like social factor just in day-to-day interactions with people.
Well, my hope is that if a person were to discover that they're using an unreliable methodology or epistemology, like I have a gut feeling that that person is good, something like that, that a short conversation where let's say they're making a claim. I'm using a gut feeling to conclude that karma is real or something like that. If a person can discover that gut feelings are perhaps not the best way, they may have some value, but as far as coming to 100% certainty that something's true, if they can take another look at that process, there are likely hundreds of other things that they are using that epistemology or method, gut feeling, to arrive at. So this isn't just about destroying, I think I mentioned this before, this is not just about destroying a belief. It's about examining methodologies, because if you can be a little bit more cautious in how you're getting to a conclusion, if you look at that method, that could significantly affect a lot of other things that you are coming to call true.
Now, I've also had experience of that social utility of street epistemology, where when you actually start looking at the way that somebody forms beliefs, it's such a good way, like you said, of measuring how reliable the information that person gives you is. And at work, we had a case where he's kind of a guy who's super optimistic, and he's got this bias where he would always tell you the best of what's happening, and he would not hide, but downplay any negative parts of a project or something like that. And I could see in many of my colleagues, it was causing this serious cognitive dissonance. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to trust the guy. Because I think we all inherently have that need to trust somebody when they tell us something. And when we spoke about, but how he forms his beliefs, how he actually sees the world, I saw, it was kind of like a light switch going on. Everybody else started saying, okay, cool. We now have a better idea of how to handle him when he does make these claims. So it's very helpful like that.
Yeah, and that's actually similar to the context of the quote from the book that I read at the beginning. It's a book on violence, and specifically the difference between training for violence and real-world violence. And the section about epistemology, right after that quote that I read, he tells a story about one of his friends who's a great martial artist who attended some seminar where this expert on some technique decided to teach this technique, and the friend, who is, again, a great martial artist, just absorbed word for word what this guy was saying and went to practice this technique, and it didn't work. The technique was not good, and he was confused, and the author said to him, well, look, why is it that you think this technique was good in the first place? Examine your epistemology behind why you absorbed this technique as something worth using. And in that case, it was because he was relying on the testimony of a supposed expert and hadn't actually gone out to look at whether it works in real life, hadn't tried it himself.
That's kind of a funny story, because it reminds me of reading the book that started all this. I didn't write the book on street epistemology. Dr. Peter Boghossian did. And I was looking for examples. And there really weren't any video examples. I started going out, and I was failing miserably. So I kept going back to the book and going back to the group and getting feedback. And even Boghossian himself would tweet to me, like I'd send him a link to a video I did in 2013 or whatever. And he would say something cryptic like, look into modeling behavior. I'm like, modeling behavior, like models, like these like attractive people who are like, I didn't, I was such a novice. So I like researched this, like, oh, I see what he's saying. Like, I need to act in the way that I want my conversation partner to act, so I was getting lots of feedback, but I was failing forward and growing at it and getting lots of feedback from people. But yeah, I wanted to go out and test this method that I was reading about, because part of me was really excited about it, but the other part of me was fairly skeptical. How do I know that this thing works? where are the examples? And there weren't any out there. So I just went out and decided to start making them. And fortunately, it seems like the method is fairly effective.
I would say so.
How certain are you on a scale of 0 to 100?
It depends on what you mean by effective. That's my what. Let's see. Let's define that word. Go to why. Go to how.
Inside joke, folks.
Yeah.
Inside joke that you can be part of if you go watch the videos.
You know, the thing is, though, I love the fact that Ben just asked that, because that's something that we tend to do. When you learn street epistemology, when you learn this act of asking questions and challenging claims, you tend to start applying it on everything.
Yeah,
including the things that I'm about to say. If I'm going to make a post on Facebook, there's a few other additional lines of thought that go through my head before I make that post, because somebody's going to probably call me on it.
Especially in the Street Epistemology study group.
Especially in the SE group, yeah.
Who would you say is the target audience of street epistemology as opposed to some other format for discussing beliefs, like a debate?
Damn, that's a good question. Who's a target for the videos or for street epistemology in general? Well, I guess it's the same answer for me. Every human who has the capacity to learn this method, I would say. This idea was born in the atheist community, but there's no reason why it needs to stay there. We're trying to break through and out of that bubble. Yes, it's wonderful for challenging a person how they concluded that their God is real. But I think, as you'll see in the videos, we encourage people to pick a topic. We even want God believers to learn this method so that they can ask themselves these questions and other God believers these questions. And even non-believers, I would love God believers to start using street epistemology with atheists who don't believe, who are claiming that there is no God. So the content that I'm throwing up there is really geared towards everybody. I'm cognizant that there are people who disagree with me on claims or agree with me on the claims that I make. It doesn't matter. I want as many people to stumble across this method and those examples as possible.
I'm always jealous when I hear stories like Anthony's story when he was younger, about him being so skeptical and questioning these things. And I think, what the hell was wrong with me? Why did I just accept all of it? And I think it depends on where you grow up and what you're exposed to. People tend to suppress children's inquisitiveness. It depends on where you grow up, but especially in like very conservative cultures, people don't like kids asking these questions. Just this week, I spoke to a guy who told, and we were talking about the statement, it's good to question beliefs. And he said, no, like when little children, you need to tell them, we bought you at the hospital. You don't want to get into the conversation about where do the babies come from, because you just don't want to go there. And I completely disagree. I think the sooner you can start teaching somebody to be skeptical, not necessarily to the degree where they're like never certain of anything, but at least to ask the question, to try and understand and have good reasons for accepting claims and believing what they believe. That is so beneficial. And the scary thing to me is I speak to people when I go out and make these street epistemology videos, and simple questions like, how do you know? They tell me that they've never been asked these questions before, and they really respond well to it. But it's just terrifying that we can grow up in these bubbles where we're surrounded with people who believe exactly the same things we do, and we are never challenged.
Yeah, and I've stumbled across some old people on the trail, people who are 80 years old, who say, I don't think anyone has ever asked me why I think God is real, or how did I come to this belief. And it's sad. I find it quite sad when I encounter people like that. But I'm hopeful. You're asking about the audience of the videos. That's one of the takeaways I hope people walk away from after watching these, is that it's healthy to question. It's actually beneficial to doubt. Yes, it could be uncomfortable, but the sooner we start asking these questions and the sooner we start challenging the methods we use to get to our conclusions, the quicker we can be less incorrect. So this is a valuable exercise that I think people should be excited about. We should encourage this type of questioning and introspection. And I would love to see it happen with people much, much younger.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a word that has come up a couple of times, skepticism. And I think that's another one of those terms that has some stigma around it. It seems like a little bit of a loaded term. I want to get your takes on, like, when you talk about wanting to be skeptical of things or wishing you had been more skeptical as a child, what do you mean by skepticism?
For me, it's really about epistemic humility, realizing that no, you don't have all the answers, realizing that no, when you take a position, that position isn't absolutely true and has to be defended at all costs. So for me, it's much more approach to truth. Instead of having this high desire for certainty, which I think a lot of people do, and I think I'm lucky enough to have it to a lesser degree. It's the willingness to go out of your comfort zone and maybe look and see if there's a valid point contrary to what you might believe. So that's pretty much how I try to approach it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think skepticism is such a charged word. That was sort of my first reaction. Like, I think it's healthy to be a skeptic, and it's not something that you should ever be ashamed of or anything. Or I just don't see the need to soften that word. Skepticism helps us from being taken advantage of. Now, I do think that sometimes people go too far to the point where they become cynical, where they become conspiracy theorists because they won't believe anything unless they've somehow formed their belief. Like, they're actually very cryptic people. They might even be more difficult to talk to than like a dogmatic, zealous religious person or something like that. I'm not sure, but skepticism I think is healthy, something that should be encouraged, and is a really great way to go about navigating the world, if you ask me.
That was actually one of the things I wanted to ask was, when do we know it's gone too far? For example, I was never raised religious, but I had very strong political convictions, and I didn't really have any evidence for them. I just thought that's what was right. And as I put those beliefs through the epistemological, ringer, my level of certainty about them all decreased, even if I still agree with some of the points. But I feel like my level of action is so much lower than it was before. So, for example, I was really active in the anti-hydrofracking movement. So I would go to places and, hand out flyers and, do volunteer work. But and my certainty that it was bad was 100%, 99%. It was, unshakable. And now that I don't have those certainties about it, even if I would lean that way, I don't feel confident enough to take action to do something. So that's been my question. I've almost been in a little, like you said, almost cynical or just so uncertain that I don't want to commit to action because I'm not sure enough. And I don't think that that's the right course of action.
Yeah, that might be a sign that you're becoming too skeptical if it starting to paralyze you and you're afraid to, I know you didn't say this, but if you're afraid to leave your house because you just can't trust anything or anyone, then you might have crossed the line at some point.
I think it's something which I noticed myself doing as well. When I make a claim, I add all of these qualifiers. So it seems to me, and it might be
totally,
yeah. And
this seems likely to work or something. Right?
But what it also has kind of made me do is I've made peace of it. It was definitely a process of this cognitive dissonance where you're trying to be open to all these claims. You're analyzing your own beliefs and trying to find the right level of confidence to apply to it. But after I went through that process, it made me much more confident to actually state what I believe and to engage with people. And part of that is also to be open to making mistakes. So you might have beliefs which are terrible, and the only way that you might find that out is by actually throwing them out there, having them criticized, and adapting your behavior according to that. And I'm not 100% sure yet, there it goes again, that in my actions, that's also flowing through. So just going out and actually creating these videos, street epistemology videos, I mean, I'm an engineer. I'm a social freaking recluse. This is so way out of my comfort zone. It's not even funny, but I'm enjoying it. And I don't think I would have got there if I hadn't had this kind of mindset shift coming from street epistemology.
I just uploaded a video yesterday where two ladies are approaching me. And again, you don't have to initiate talks and film them in public to do SE. They asked, "How you doing?" And I said, "I think I'm doing good." You find that becoming skeptical, like I very well I could have cancer and I could be dying, but just I'm not aware of it yet, right? So this approach does tend to slow things down, and you start thinking more about the words that you've said and that you're planning to say. So, but it's not a paralyzing thing. I think it's liberating. It's a liberating thing to realize that, oh my gosh, I don't have to know everything. It's okay to say I don't know. It's okay to have, like Ben said, that word again, that epistemic humility is actually quite a liberating and freeing thing. And it tends to lead to very good conversations because other people can see that in you, and then they might be a little bit more willing to explore their beliefs.
Yeah, and that's sort of one of the things that we've been trying to evangelize with the message of our podcast. You know, it's called The Switch, and the whole idea is examining ideas and experiences that change our minds. And really, the idea from the start has been, like, it doesn't make any sense to preach epistemic humility, to say you need to be, have a humble approach to your own epistemologies. You need to admit that you could be wrong. The better approach in our minds was, well, let's figure out what ways we might need to examine our own minds about things and just do our best to model epistemic humility, like to be role models for ourselves. And so, yeah, I think that goes along with the sort of core message of The Switch.
Well, and it kind of goes along with the core message of SE in that you don't tell people, hey, you need to be humble about your beliefs. A simple exploration of a claim that they have and an examination of the process that they use to get there can generally tend to foster that type of reflection and humility. And it kind of goes along with SE in that we don't tell people what to think. We don't generally give them evidence to show that they're mistaken. That can tend to generate what's known as the backfire effect. These are things that we want to avoid. Asking questions tends to result in so much growth, not only in a re-examination of the confidence that a person has on their belief claim, but them as a person. And that's why I'm so enamored with it and jump at the chance to be able to talk about it on shows like this, so that people can hear about it, watch a video or two, and then I think you'll be blown away by what's happening in these dialogues.
Yeah. You mentioned the backfire effect. What is that?
Well, it's a hypothesis that if you provide somebody with evidence that shows that they're mistaken on a claim that they make, so they might think that open carrying weapons is a good thing. If you were to show them a study that showed that it's actually not, they'd probably ignore your evidence and keep believing what they believe even more. And it works for the flip side too. Okay. Regardless of what your stance is on a claim, if you are to encounter evidence that shows that you're mistaken, particularly if it's a cherished belief that is so core to your identity, that you probably ignore the evidence and just hunker down even more. And the backfire effect, that's the backfire effect. So I think there was a recent study to suggest that people might still accept your evidence, but it doesn't tend to change the person's attitude towards their belief, which is why when we ask these questions during a street epistemology session, it's brilliant because we're asking the person to tell us how they got there, and that keeps a person's defenses low, even our own. Like, we encourage people to use this method with us. So yeah, that is, I think, one of the genesis behind Boghossian developing this approach is he recognized that, hey, telling a person that they're mistaken or arguing with them is going to probably not get us anywhere. We need to start asking questions.
Yeah. One of the things that's interesting to me is people have these trigger words where if you just mention that you've got a certain position, you vote for a certain political party or you've got a certain belief, it basically gives them grounds to dismiss everything that you say. They stick you in a box, and that's the box of people I ignore. I can't listen to this guy. He's a heretic of some kind. And SE really helps you to bypass that, because you are modeling that, like we said, that behavior where you're trying to understand their position. And it's very natural for us to then do the same to the person you're speaking to. And I love that.
You know what's funny, though? You know what's funny is that these days I'll watch people arguing, and it could be about any topic. It could be an atheist arguing with a God believer, or somebody arguing about a political thing or whatever. And I'm just thinking, why are they doing this? This is not helping anybody except maybe people who are watching the exchange. It's certainly not effective for a one-on-one conversation. That much seems to be clear.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult for me to watch that. It saddens me to see people arguing, because I think that if they were to learn this approach of street epistemology, the results would be so much different. So in a way, I get frustrated. Like I said, I get frustrated watching this stuff, because I'm thinking, oh my gosh, if they could just learn this method, I think that they would be so much happier.
Yeah, I want to ask you about your experiences making these videos. What have you guys seen? Like, what are some of the most common epistemologies that people have that they, may have left unexamined? Like, what are the most common reasons you see people having for the beliefs that you examine?
Well, kind of depends on the claim. So if a person is claiming that a God is real, I might hear something like, it says it in this book, or I was taught it at a young age and I've just never questioned it. I had a personal experience and it's unexplainable, so I'm justified in concluding that it's this higher power. They might say that I experienced a miracle, or I prayed and something happened and that was confirmation that this is true. Typically, though, when you start asking these questions for spiritual claims, whether it's God existing or karma is real, I even talked to a person who said that he believed in ghosts. The underlying methodology or epistemology that people tend to be using in those instances is faith. That tends to be the core level method that people are using to get to their conclusions. Sometimes it's evidence. Sometimes people say, I've researched this topic, I have evidence that backs this up, and that's how I got from point A to point B. And that doesn't mean the conversation's dead. You can still keep asking questions to explore, what kind of evidence are we talking about? What evidence would change your mind? That type of thing. So that's kind of been my experience. I don't know, Ben, if you've experienced anything different.
Very similar. Faith is a bit of a suitcase word, though. Especially I mentioned it earlier, one of the things which makes it a bit more difficult in South Africa is the word faith isn't used that frequently. I don't know if it's a language thing, because most people here aren't first language English speakers, but they use the word belief almost interchangeably with faith. And what I found is when people say faith, it kind of, or my hypothesis is that it actually means societal pressure. They see everybody around them doing this thing, and they feel like they're doing something wrong if they don't also believe this. They're doing something wrong if this method is also not convincing to them. And basically, there's this process where they do something. They go and pray, or they go and think about this, or they go and speak to their friends to reinforce whatever belief is being challenged in some way, or whatever belief they might be experiencing doubt in. So, yeah, and that's why in SE we typically try to ask people, what does the word faith mean to you? And try to unpack that just to get to something which is more clear. And it's very important that you don't make assumptions when people use that word, because it is a word that can mean a lot of things to a lot of people.
You'll probably notice in the SE videos that if somebody offers a suitcase word like faith, one of the very first things practitioners tend to do is ask them to define that word so that we're not misrepresenting them. And it's amazing how many different definitions of the word faith, for example, there are out there. It's quite interesting.
Have you ever encountered in any time where you've been sort of consciously practicing SE, whether it's on video or just in everyday interactions, have you ever encountered an interlocutor that changed your mind?
I did have a conversation. I don't think I uploaded it, where I was questioning a woman who thought that it was about abortion, and she was pro-choice. So even though I might share her stance on it, I still asked the same kind of questions. I still challenged the what, why, and her how. Yeah. And I think at the end of it, that was one of the conversations where I found myself, even today, thinking about that dialogue and wondering, about my stance on it even more. So I oftentimes don't find myself changing my mind on things, but it definitely causes me to pause and reflect on the things that I think are true.
I've had a couple of experiences where I've spoken to people, and mostly these are people who I'm very close with, about religion. And what I found is, by asking these questions and really trying to understand their position, sometimes it becomes kind of convincing, especially when they deep dive into these serious personal experiences. And I think they might have a way of framing it, which makes you think, wow, that's a huge coincidence. And it put me in a state of cognitive dissonance, where you really feel kind of uncomfortable after the conversation, like, holy shit, am I right about this? And you need to go and reflect on it and really apply that skeptical mindset to it. I think that's probably the problem I have.
I've listened to a few compelling ghost stories where I'm thinking, holy cow, what did she see? Maybe that was some sort of apparition. What's going on there?
So, Anthony, you mentioned that it's a method. Do you think you could kind of walk us through what the process is?
Yeah. So when we talk about street epistemology being a method, well, we refer to street epistemology as a method, and yet the focus of street epistemology is a person's method. So this can be a little confusing. When I talk about street epistemology, I mean it's an approach to having a dialogue with a person, typically in a one-on-one or two-on-one situation, small dialogues here, where you are identifying what the person believes and clearing up any confusion about terms, maybe getting a sense of a person's certainty on a scale from 1 to 10 or 1 to 100 or something like that, and getting a full understanding. When you say you believe in a ghost, can you tell me exactly what you mean by that? And you listen to what they say, repeat it back to them so that they can hear those words. And then you move on to their reasons or their why. What would you say is the main reason why you think that this is true? And they may say, well, back when I was a little girl, I would sit on my grandmother's knee and she would tell me these stories about there being ghosts. And I've just always believed it since then. And then, of course, when the chair moved across the room, it was obviously my grandmother coming to say hello because it happened on her birthday. What other explanation could there be? So identifying why or the reasons that they're using to come to that conclusion, but not just accepting their first reason per se, verifying and saying, okay, if you didn't see that chair move across the room, would you still be just as certain that ghosts are real? And the person might say, well, yes, of course. Then you can set aside that experience that they had and keep peeling back the layers. find out the main reason. Find the reason that would lower a person's confidence the most if they discovered that it was untrue. Once you have that, then you want to focus on their how, their process, the method they used to arrive at their high degree of certainty. How did you conclude that you hearing this story from your grandmother about ghosts is actually true? And that's typically when people struggle the most, is to explain and justify the method that they used. I think the how related questions are the ones that people struggle with the most, including the four of us and everyone listening. It's very difficult to explain how you determined that justification is reliable. But the act of trying to explain it and explore it tends to move people off of their certainty. That's when you can revisit the claim. That's when you can circle back and touch on the what and say, is 100% confidence that ghosts are real really the most accurate spot to be? And it's so funny how even after a 5 or 10 minute talk, people tend to move off of their levels of certainty. That's street epistemology in a nutshell. It goes deeper. There's a whole component to modeling behavior, like we talked about, embracing pauses so that when they're thinking about it, you don't jump on that silence, giving them a way to contact you afterwards. So if they actually do think of a better reason why they think ghosts are real, they can tell you about it because ghosts might be real. That's something that I want to know. But that's street epistemology in a nutshell.
That's something I'd like to add. People who watch the videos should not think this what Anthony is doing, or this what Reed's doing, or this what Ben's doing. That's how you do street epistemology. This is something which can be experimented with. There's a bunch of different approaches. My friend Tyrone Wells, Dr. Tyrone Wells, he's got a channel called Let's Chat where he's got a much more conversational technique. And because he's able to really engage people in a very fun way, he takes risks that other street epistemologists might not take. And the other thing which I would like people to realize is you don't have to get the whole process right from start to finish. You don't have to walk through these stages. There are these tiny little elements in SE that you can pick up and easily start applying to your conversations. And those already can start making such a huge difference and allowing you to communicate that much better.
Yeah, I think there are pros and cons to watching a video and then walking away with the perception of, oh, that's how I have to be. It could be helpful for somebody who wants to learn it, get comfortable with it. And I've literally seen videos of people who have gone out for the first time and recorded a conversation after having watched 30 or 40 videos of SE and just nailing it, like having a wonderful conversation where the person expressed uncertainty with their claim after the fact. And they ended on good terms and it was great. However, I think Ben has a good point. You don't want to just copy a person's style. Like, try to find your own style. Try to bring your own personality and skills and the things that you can bring to the table, I think, and try to make this different, try to make it better. We want people to experiment with this and keep developing it. I seriously think that in 5 years' time, we'll look back on SE and we'll marvel at how far it's come. And it's only going to get there by new people entering the fray, like Ben and Tyrone, like he mentioned. We have Eddie from Deep Discussions, Linda, who's in Cordial. What is her channel? Super Curious. Yeah, she's out of Finland. I mean, we have people from all over the world that are learning this and bringing their own style to it. And I think that's the way that this method's going to grow.
Are there any other pieces of street epistemology that you think are worth covering? Any other points that you want to hit?
Well, sure. Street epistemology works really good when a person is being open and honest with you and they view truth as objective. So one of the things you might notice, if you watch enough street epistemology videos, you might notice that we kind of tote around a little box of Tic Tacs or candies. we might introduce we call it the Ferrari experiment, where we're starting to notice problems in the conversation 5 or 10 or 15 minutes into the talk, where if we had just asked a question at the very start, we may have completely avoided it or addressed something a little bit more fundamental before getting to a person's belief. So we try to identify those roadblocks earlier in the conversation, I think. so that they don't become problematic later on. And a good example of that, I think, is this idea of objective truth. If somebody thinks everybody can have their own truth, and it doesn't matter where you were born or what you were taught, as long as you really, really think that it's true, it's true. If somebody thinks that, you've got a much bigger issue to address before you get into why they think karma is real or their God is real or their stance on a political event or something like that. So that's a really good example of something that I think was born out of people going out and having talks and running headlong into these brick walls, and then taking a step back, and we're stunned and we're talking about it. And then we kind of figure out well, what's a creative and entertaining way that we can kind of address this problem.
Yeah, actually, could you talk more about how you address the sort of relativistic mindset?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of different ways, and I wrote a blog post about it. I think it's called Addressing Relativism When Using Street Epistemology. It's a very literal description of what it is. But there's a couple of different ways. One of the techniques is to ask them early on about something that can either be black or white. It's nuanced. It's yes, no. It's true, false. I think I started off by asking people about armadillos. Are they egg layers or are they live bearers? What do you think? And it's really good for building rapport too. But they either are egg layers or live bearers or maybe something else. I mean, right? They can maybe, I don't know, somehow procreate some way differently. But it's one or the other. And once you get buy-in that it can only be one thing or the other, then you can progress. And if you hit a roadblock that everybody can have their own truth, you can say, well, if I really think that armadillos are live bearers and you really think that they're egg layers, surely you would agree that one of us is incorrect and one of us isn't correct, right? And so that's a really good way to address it. Another thing, we carry these little box of candies around. I don't have any laying around right now, but we'll ask them if they think the total number of pieces in the container is either even or odd simultaneously. And it's funny how I would say 30% of the people I talk to will say, oh, it can be even and odd. If you think it's odd and I think it's even and we count them up, even though there's an even number in there, you're still right if you thought that there was an odd number in there.
Yeah. It's a superposition of even and odd.
Some people break that out, yeah. But it can be really fascinating, but you really have to, like I mentioned, it's so critical that people buy into the concept of there being, there's either an even number or an odd number in there. Mm-hmm. It's got to be one or the other.
Yeah.
I've had 30-minute conversations with people who insist that it could be both.
Yeah. I particularly like the one where you took the woman's water bottle.
Oh, I forgot about that one. Yeah, that's a little bit of a more aggressive one. There was a woman standing in front of me. She said that everybody can have their own truth. If it just feels good for you, you can make it true. What's wrong with that? And I just reached out and I grabbed her water bottle and I said, "This is my water bottle. It's true for me." And she started laughing. I think she got it right away. And then she said something like, "Well, then I would just think you're crazy or something." So that was a pretty effective way of driving home that point too.
It's very useful for me, at least it's been very useful looking into fallacies, common fallacies, how do our minds fool us and biases? And it helps you to kind of identify when people are using these biases to come to a conclusion. And there it becomes very fun to think of a creative way to express it to them. One thing that I've found is useful as well is if you can frame it in a way where they can relate to it. So this weekend I spoke to a girl who had a faith in a God, but her main reason was she was taught to believe in this God by her elders, and she thinks they would never lie to her. They've got her best interest at heart, and they truly believe in this. And one thing that I know a lot of girls in her culture struggles with is the view that their elders have on feminism, on women studying at university, women not being at home in the kitchen. So I asked her, what do your elders think about you being here and studying at the university? And she said, no, they don't really like it. And I said, do you agree with them? She said, no. I said, could that be the same case with this God belief? And she paused, good pause, like Anthony always tells me, she marinated in it for a while. And she said, she wants to say no, but she can't. And those are really the moments that you should try and go for.
Ben or Anthony, do either of you guys have other points that you want to cover before we move on here?
I've been playing around with something interesting with the help of a lot of the people in the Street Epistemology community. What I found is that many times, just by asking these questions, you can have such a good response where people just say, I've never thought of that, or nobody's ever asked me that question. And I came up with the idea from Anthony's Twitter feed of setting up a questionnaire, which basically has a bunch of common questions related to epistemology and also in a way to people's worldview. So we've got that on our Street Epistemology study group, and I've actually went out and filmed a couple of interviews where I go through this questionnaire with people. And it has proved to be very effective, the experiment. It was interesting for me to see, without even diving into a specific claim, just by going through this questionnaire, especially when there's more than one person, they start actually challenging beliefs on the spot by just asking questions about how do we know things are true. So that's something which I'm promoting as an easy way to get into not necessarily street epistemology, but to start conversations about beliefs with people.
I really like that Ben's doing that, because I think there are some people who might be on the fence and uneasy about challenging a person's belief. But if you have a list of some canned questions that explore this idea of objective truth, or do you value truth? How do you feel about hypotheticals? Things like that. These are great questions. These are really good at building rapport, getting people to think. I think Ben even gives them the sheet to take with them so that they can do this with their friends. And then perhaps they might come back to you later, or even during that same conversation, you might say, okay, now that we've explored those questions, would you be interested in exploring a claim that you think is true? And then you can just you can shift into SE mode. There's one thing that I would like to encourage people is to look into street epistemology. And if you see something that worries you, or you think we should be doing differently, try to bring that to our attention. We're always looking for ways to improve what we're doing. We actually want to come up with a way of measuring the effectiveness of this approach too. We have no scientific studies to back up what we're doing. All we really have are our own personal experiences and the videos that you can watch yourself, where you might walk away with the impression that a seed was planted, or that person began to doubt, or, oh, wow, they really lowered their confidence in that claim. We really need people who have the resources to help us test this. So I want to encourage people who might have a background in that. If you are let's say you're a PhD student or a master's degree student, and you're looking for something to study, this would really be a fabulous thing to look into. And if something that we've said today concerns you, reach out to me on Twitter, or Ben, or anyone who's doing street epistemology. We have so many different resources out there today, different communities. We even have a group specifically for people to critique the method on Facebook. If you search for critique street epistemology, you'll find it. Please surface your concerns, because it's helping us make this better. We don't want to be in our own little bubble where we're just trotting along all happy, thinking that we're doing really good here. We want people to help us prod and provoke and test this as much as possible.
Alex, do you have any other questions or anything you want to ask?
No, I think that was all very clear. No, I'm all good with me.
Cool. Great. So, guys, if people want to learn more about street epistemology, or watch your videos, or read through your Twitter feeds and try to find stuff to, I don't know, write in news articles about you or something. If people want to figure out more, where can they go to find out?
The Street Epistemology website, I think, is probably the best place to go, and then click on resources. It's not the clearest page, but it's chock full of resources and links to videos. There's an app even that you can download for free. I think the first level is free. Oh my gosh. The biggest one I think lately that I think is fabulous is the latest releases playlist that we have, where so many people are generating SE related content, whether it's a dialogue with somebody on the street, or they've given a presentation on it, or they have a critique about it, or something else, or there's even a podcast where the topic comes up like this. Like, we'll throw this interview in that playlist. Ben, you'll have to remind me of what the URL is. We have a tiny URL, but there's a website.
We'll link everything in the description as well. If you forget to mention something, just send it my way.
Yeah, that's awesome. We'll definitely give that to you, because there's nothing like seeing video examples to grasp what's happening, and there's something very special happening in these talks.
Awesome. Well, guys, with that, we're going to go ahead and move on to a segment we like to call the off topic. Today it'll be the off topics, since there are two of you. And we flipped a coin beforehand. No, we didn't flip a coin, but I'm just going to randomly pick and say that Ben's going to go first with his off topic. So, Ben, what do you have for us?
I thought I'd talk about something very dear to my heart, and that's my country of birth, South Africa. There's a lot of misinformation out there. I watched a YouTube video a couple of weeks ago where the guy claimed that South Africa has more white people than black people. I was like, that's news to me. So yeah, South Africa's got a bit of a bad rap as a country of a very high crime rate. It is true to a degree. A big issue that we have is there are areas that suffer from massive poverty, and it's like, imagine if you guys had 50 Detroits somewhere. It does skew the crime statistics a bit. I think it's a very cool place to visit. We've got everything that you can want. We've got a desert. We've got beautiful sandy beaches. We've got semi-tropics. We've got snowy mountains. You can get it all in one package. And no lions in the street. You can see them if you go to the right places. And it's very cheap, especially if you're coming from the US. We've got a currency which is tied to the crap that our president talks about. So if you time it right, you can get serious bargains coming here.
Nice. And you're actually not the only YouTube person that I've seen named Ben in South Africa. There's a YouTuber who, he does stuff elsewhere as well, but that's primarily where my knowledge of South Africa came from, is his videos. And they'll go, I think they're more in not Johannesburg,
Cape Town.
There you go. Thank you.
Okay.
And they'll go climb the mountain and go to the beach and all that stuff. So yeah, I have a fairly good impression of South Africa. I'd love to visit.
Yeah, if you ever do, be sure to come past my place.
Sounds good. Alex, Anthony, any of you guys got anything on South Africa?
I know so little about that country. Pretty much all I know about it is anything that Ben happens to mention about it, I suppose. I would love to go there one day. That'd be kind of neat to do, like head over there and give a talk or something.
Yeah, same as Anthony. I don't know much.
SE field trip.
Oh, that would be neat. That'd be cool.
I think really it's probably one of the most underrated places. I have a couple of German friends, and the Germans are notorious tourists. And most of the Germans, they typically don't go to the same place more than once. They're very precise. I've had this experience. I'm not going back. And what I've noticed with most of the Germans who come here is it becomes a sticking point. Every year they plan a trip to South Africa. So yeah, I think that counts in our favor at least.
Nice. That's funny. Cool. Well, in that case, we're going to move on to Anthony's off topic. Anthony, what do you have for us?
Oh man, I've been racking my brain this whole time thinking what I'm going to talk about. I guess the one thing that's on my mind right now that's completely off topic is I have a pond in my backyard, and I would love to have goldfish in it. But I hate when the water's not clear. So I'm actually not putting any fish in it and just treating the hell out of the water with chemicals just so it could be nice and clear and clean, at the expense of putting any wildlife in it, any fish. So I've got this pond in my backyard that sounds lovely and it looks lovely, but it's not hosting any, well, there's probably microbial life, I suppose, that can survive on it, but there's no goldfish in it. Now, I did experiment, and I let the water acclimate and get the chemicals out of there and put some goldfish in there. But what was happening is birds were coming and raccoons and stuff were coming and eating the goldfish. So my kids were getting traumatized. Like, where's Lucy at? She's gone. So there's snakes that get drawn to it. There's frogs that will go in there and then they croak. And I think I'm leaning more towards just keeping it treated and with no wildlife in it and just sort of enjoying it. But it sort of defeats the purpose, I think, of like, well, why are you having a pond if you're not going to deal with the natural aspects of it that come with it? So that's kind of a dilemma that I'm struggling with that I thought I'd mention. Any thoughts?
My question was basically, are there, like, did you look up guidelines for how to treat it? Like, how do I make my pond clear? Or did you just
I've spent close to $1,000 coming up with all sorts of different ways of filtering the water. And there's this wonderful video that shows how you can take these 55 gallon barrel drums and you use this filter medium and you transfer from one to the other and your water will just be crystal clear. No, it's not happening. I do think that maybe the location of my pond, it's the sun's just beating on it all day long. So I think that might be a big challenge. It might be possible to get the best of both worlds where it can be crystal clear and I could still have some goldfish in there. But I think I might still be struggling with all the ancillary stuff, like literally coyotes coming into my yard to drink from the pond.
That's awesome.
Whether my dog's barking at it or not. So I think I'm going to just kind of lean towards more keeping it clean and pretty at the expense of pushing away the nature that might be drawn to it.
How big is it?
It's huge. It's not huge. Okay, it's pretty big. Uh-huh. It used to be 6 feet deep and about 8 feet by 12 feet. But then I recently decreased the depth of it because I thought, well, that's less water to filter. Like maybe that will help with I've tried this has been a time suck of immense proportions. Don't ever put a pond in your yard is my advice.
That's what I've heard too from my neighbors in upstate New York.
Don't do it. Yeah, just don't do it.
Yeah.
For some reason that reminded me of I saw a video once of a guy who made, I think he called it like an inverted fish tank or something in a pond.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Have you ever seen that?
Yes, they're incredible.
It's like it's a fish tank, but the bottom is open and it leads into the rest of the pond and it just comes up out of the water. So the fish can actually swim above the surface level of the water and sort of look out at the world above the surface of the pond.
That's really neat. It's like a tower in the middle of your pond.
Yeah.
And the fish can look into your backyard basically. It's neat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
I wanted to do that. That was one of the reasons why I put the pond in there, but it just doesn't seem like it's feasible.
Yeah. Can you swim in it with all the chemicals you put in it?
It's crystal clear. Yeah. There's probably no bacteria. I nuke it. I nuke it every week. I just dump a whole shitload of chemicals in it.
Okay.
It's pretty clear.
It's funny. Cool. Well, guys, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. This has been awesome. It's been wonderful meeting you guys and talking to you. And I'm a big fan of SE and SE videos. And yeah, it's been great. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having us on. It was really nice to meet you guys, and thanks for hopefully introducing SE to a brand new audience.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. It was awesome.
The Switch is produced by Mojo Filter Media, a company specializing in audio production for video games and interactive media. You can check out our website at www.mojofilter.media.